take us to those early days growing up with your dad. What were some key things you learned about positioning and how companies can be successful, can be more successful?
Yeah, well, it comes from, the ultimate and most important principle is the idea of this focus, right? So standing for something starts with focusing in on one thing and not trying to be everything to everyone. And that's, a very important principle to think about and understand. And what's interesting too is, in my father's world, he ran an advertising agency for 30 years. And, that in the book and positioning was, to bring in business and get notoriety. But what ultimately happened was that they were asked for consulting. So big companies like Burger King, they didn't want to hire my dad's little B2B agency for, advertising, but they did want to talk to him about strategy. So by the mid 80s, their business was about 50-50, right? The consulting was, growing, but they also had the traditional B2B advertising business. And it just so happens, actually, he was giving a speech and someone said, hey, you're not following your own advice on focus, right? You're talking about telling us to do it. Why don't you do it yourself? And he actually took that really to heart. And he was like, you know what? You're right. We are, dividing ourselves. How can we promote ourselves as an advertising agency as well as consulting? And they conflicted with each other, right? The ad agency didn't want to, the people going for the ad agency felt, a bit slighted about the consulting side, and the consulting clients didn't want to be pushed into using the advertising agency. So he actually, in the late 80s, shut down the agency, giving up 50% of his income, right? 50% of the business and the sales. But because he was able to focus on consulting, that business grew. He became, and eventually I joined him just a few years later, becoming extremely well known on the consulting side and focusing on what we do. Listen, there's a lot of companies that can, pull off the advertising part of the business, but we think our focus and our expertise is more strongly aligned with the consulting and the advice on the positioning strategy. So, it's always important to sort of apply those principles to yourself. It can be actually challenging, but it's very effective when you do so.